Hey y'all, Scott here. I cherish the Nintendo GameCube. It's all I'll ever need. Okay, I'm not upset, but my insulin was there too. The Nintendo GameCube. I would love to have seen that meeting.
Name it after a shape.
Name it after a f***ing shape!
Oh yeah!
This was my childhood system, and by proxy, is my favorite game console of all time. Funny how that works out. Everything about it, I absolutely adore. It has one of my favorite libraries, controllers, and system designs out there. It's impossible to not have fun looking at this thing, let alone playing it. And with how many people I hear constantly talk about their nostalgia link to the GameCube, I was shocked to find out I was hearing voices in my head. Yeah, the GameCube sold pretty poorly, not only in comparison to the competition at the time, but previous Nintendo systems. See, as a kid, I never realized this. I was too busy stick flicking. I always knew the PlayStation 2 was more popular, but it wasn't until I logged onto the internet one faithful day I discovered just how many people said geometry can kiss my ass. The GameCube was where I became a Nintendo fanboy, i.e., a fucking idiot. I was willing to defend this console to death. It could have been convicted of manslaughter, and I would say, yeah, well, the third-party support was better than you think. I would go to my friend's house who had a PlayStation 2, look at the controller, and scoff. Yeah, you may have every game known to man release on this thing, DVD playback, music CD support, backwards compatibility with the PlayStation 1, more robust online multiplayer, but I can bring mine to lunch. I mean, looking back, I can clearly see a lot of the GameCube's downsides and how they might have contributed to such low sales. It doesn't mean I love it any less, it just means I might not make my emergency contact. Might. But it's hard to ignore how it feels like everybody's had a GameCube experience in their lives. There's death, taxes, and Luigi's Mansion. So let's discuss the Nintendo GameCube, Nintendo's first foray into the GameCube market. Nintendo dominated the video game industry with their initial home consoles, the Nintendo Entertainment System and Super Nintendo Entertainment System, yet started to struggle with their third, the Nintendo 64. While a modest success, not only were sales going down with each new Nintendo console, they were no longer top dog. With a controller like this, anything was possible, even failure. Sony's PlayStation sold over 100 million units, over 3 times as much as what the 64 sold. Why did Nintendo struggle so much this generation? I don't know. Well, the PlayStation used CDs for games. That allowed for far more data to be stored, bigger levels, more content, full motion video, and amazing audio quality. Couple that with the fact CDs were cheaper to mass produce, and the Nintendo 64 using cartridges just became that much more pathetic. Like, you just want to wipe your nose whenever you use this. So, while there were some outstanding titles on the platform, Nintendo just couldn't compete with Sony. Only a little over 300 games were made for the 64 compared to the PlayStation's. Point made. Onto the drawing board for Nintendo. Their successor to the Nintendo 64 was poised to be the successor to the Nintendo 64. Yeah, there wasn't necessarily a massive directional change Nintendo was making with this project. It was just meant to be a more powerful new video game machine. Codenamed Project Dolphin. Oh, badass! Development started in 1998, with the first public announcement of the codename being just prior to E3 1999. Though nothing else of worth was really talked about outside of the graphics. You'll like them. DVD support was teased, though in reality it was still up in the air. This system was a ways off, and it felt like Nintendo announced it because the Nintendo 64 just was not working out, and everybody else was showing off their new consoles. How Sega already released theirs. With Sony debuting the PlayStation 2 and Microsoft talking about stepping into the ring with their own system, Nintendo pulled a me at a high school reunion. Yeah, I got some projects in the works. You work at Big Boy. Nintendo waited a year and a half until August of 2000 at their Space World Expo in Japan to fully reveal not only their new handheld, the Game Boy Advance, but their next generation home console as well, titled GameCube. With a name like that, you can't be disappointed. The way they revealed it here made GameCube feel like a fashion statement with great specs. So many funky colors, and after complaints as to what the hell the N64 was, Nintendo went, alright, shapes are in. This was where many GameCube games debuted, albeit in the form of tech demos, or at least that's how they were presented. The first game officially shown for the GameCube was Meowth's Party. Bizarre first words. Early versions of Wave Race, Blue Storm, Luigi's Mansion, Star Wars Rogue Leader, and Metroid Prime were shown, though Nintendo claimed that none of these represented games in active development, and they were all just tech demos, which they say during every console reveal. Which this was also the case for the infamous clip of a Zelda GameCube title showcased at the event as well. Link and Ganondorf fighting it off with a graphical quality fans could only dream of. could only dream of. The GameCube was set to be fairly powerful, more so than the PlayStation 2 and Sega Dreamcast, and Nintendo was planning a launch in July of 2001 in Japan and October of 2001 in North America. Big things were in the works for not only this system, but the Game Boy Advance as well. The Nintendo 64 experienced numerous software droughts, which obviously was something Nintendo was trying to avoid this time around. They always do. So, they just gave up on the 64 as early as May 2001, releasing their last game half a year before GameCube launched, and most games in development for the 64 were moved right on over to the GameCube. Nintendo was putting their all into this generation. Honestly, I mean, the Game Boy Advance had so many games, more quality support than the Game Boy Color and original Game Boy ever had. And adding their next-gen high-tech system to the mix, also with a healthy amount of titles, you'd think they would have dominated this generation. You'd think! Nintendo is a stubborn child who doesn't actually understand why they fail in the first place sometimes. Dude, the bullet wounds help me run faster. Yes, Project Dolphin was revealed to use discs, and it seemed that Nintendo was finally responding to everybody saying they needed to move to CDs or DVDs. This wasn't what we meant. GameCube games came on discs, yes, but they were mini DVD type discs. So they were cheaper to produce than traditional Nintendo 64 cartridges, and they could store a lot more on them. They were still pathetic. The already released PlayStation 2 and upcoming Xbox used regular sized DVDs for their games, which allowed developers to store considerably more data on them. And with game files doing nothing but increasing in size every generation, it was pretty stupid that the GameCube discs were far closer to PlayStation 1 than the PlayStation 2 in terms of capacity. Even though the GameCube was more powerful, some PS2 games just wouldn't work on the thing. They were too big. You'd have to do so much work to get some of these titles to fit on GameCube because of the tiny discs. When Tiger Woods' PGA Tour on GameCube had to release on 2 of them, that's when I, as a GameCube fan, noticed something was up.
Boy, these 1.5 gigabyte discs sure are limiting.
On top of the storage limitations, these discs may have looked like mini DVDs, but they were Nintendo's own creation, meaning the GameCube was just that, a cube for game. The PlayStation 2 did as well as it did, partly because of the fact it could play DVD movies. That way, you just had to buy one product instead of a game console and DVD player separately. The Xbox could also play DVDs, hell, the Dreamcast at the very least could play music CDs. The GameCube couldn't do anything like that. So yes, while the move to discs was good, it felt like Nintendo still wanted to put their own stupid fucking spin on it. Like, fine, we'll do discs, but you're not gonna like it. They were so concerned over piracy, and the GameCube discs were trickier to copy, plus not having to cram DVD playing technology into this thing aided in giving the system a pretty low price point. Nintendo announced a starting price of $199.99, which was $100 less than the competition. Was it worth it? Nintendo was the cheap bitch this generation. That concept was announced at E3 2001 alongside the launch plans for the console. Games that were initially revealed as tech demos were shown as full-fledged games, with the Space World demo of Luigi running around with ghosts turning out to be Luigi's Mansion. Yeah, no defining Mario platformer launch title like with previous systems. Here's a smelly fucking brother instead. Of course, the big reveal was Super Smash Bros. Melee alongside a brand new IP from Nintendo, Pikmin. They alluded to this being their next Pokemon, I think because it shared a lot of the same letters. Connectivity between GameCube and Game Boy Advance was advertised heavily during the pre-launch build-up. I feel like Nintendo was expecting this to be utilized a ton. They also discussed a wireless controller for the system, the Wavebird, and after a few delays, the system launched on September 14th, 2001 in Japan, November 18th, 2001 in North America, and May 3rd, 2002 in Europe. Sales were pretty good. Until they weren't. That's generally the case with Nintendo consoles. They sell really well at launch, but if that continues throughout its life, it depends. The GameCube appealed to Nintendo fans. They were the ones who bought it up at launch. If you weren't a diehard Nintendo fan, you'd still find something to like about the console, no doubt, though there were obviously better PlayStation 2-like options available to you. With that being said, the launch of the GameCube was only 3 days after the original Xbox, 389 days after the PlayStation 2, and a little over 10,000 days after Watergate. What did Nintendo have to show for it? Oh, it's purple. The GameCube launched in 2 colors, jet black and indigo. For some reason, this was Nintendo's go-to color in North America, especially during this generation with the Game Boy Advance sporting it as well. This felt like Nintendo trying to appeal to both hardcore children and hardcore man children. Like, look, the black black one fits right next to any printer. The purple one is too much fun. Like, I want to do stocks, damn it. While the design is much more grounded than the Nintendo 64, it definitely feels like its successor, especially with the 4 controller ports on the front. I think Nintendo struck a wonderful balance between standard-looking game console and silly fucking system. This generation, Nintendo didn't necessarily try to do their own thing like they did with the Wii, Wii U, Nintendo Switch, those eras. Who cares what Sony's doing? Let's make Brain Age. GameCube, Nintendo was actively directly competing with Sony and Microsoft. However, they obviously didn't want to rid the GameCube of any Nintendo charm. It was so much smaller than other game consoles at the time. I mean, you could fit it in a car, hell, 2 of them! But the biggest Nintendo-esque innovation was being able to hold the damn thing. Video game consoles have always had this issue, and Nintendo fixed it by installing a handle for maximum looking like a lunchbox. They wanted people to lug their GameCube around and bring it to friends' houses, sometimes even going as far as considering the GameCube to be pseudo-portable. I mean, yeah, this was one of the most comfortable home consoles to travel with, but keep in mind, you also need a controller, an AC adapter, and AV cables and games, so the portability of the GameCube with the handle kind of becomes a moot point when you have to wear cargo shorts to carry the rest. I think this was more of a design choice to give the GameCube more character rather than being about functionality. Without the handle, it's literally just a game-cube. With it, it's a GameCube. I mean, I think it's important to have an instantly recognizable design for your system. If you just try to identify systems via their silhouettes, even if you think the PlayStation 5 looks disgusting, it's a better reaction than trying to figure out which one of these rectangles is the Xbox One. Let's die it right! The handle helped characterize the GameCube. It's quirky and functional, which is a sentiment that carries over to the controller. The GameCube controller. One of my go-to quotes. I love this thing. It's obvious Nintendo learned from the Nintendo 64 and other controllers out on the market. It's unbelievable how well this fits in your hands. Everything just oozes in the right position. It's like human hands were made for this. So much better than anything else on the market at the time. The PlayStation controllers, they're good, but they feel a bit too rigid, like they were made to look good rather than feel good. Xbox controllers, it just looks like it would be uncomfortable to be this. Dreamcast, you're lucky you have good games. This, I mean, it's pretty stupid looking, but it just makes so much sense. This button layout is ingenious. You have one big button that's supposed to be for your primary action in the game. Then you have everything around it, and every button has a distinct shape, which makes it so much easier to just focus on the game without looking down at the controller. If you ever play GameCube with somebody and they ask you where the B button is, you're kidding, right? Analog triggers, they're pressure sensitive, meaning in certain games you can give a shit or kind of give a shit. And they click when you push them as hard as possible, which is so smart. Other controllers, I find myself nearly breaking my fingers because I'm pushing harder and harder, even though that's as far as it'll go. The Z button? Sure. This one was always peculiar to me. I mean, it works fine. It's a shoulder button. That's the only one. The D-pad's a little too small, and the C-stick is as well. I mean, it's comfortable enough and works awesome for camera control as a secondary stick. However, we were starting to creep into first-person shooter territory this generation. Games that need both these sticks working as equals, and for that, it works perfectly fine. It's just a little funky. The GameCube controller has a few quirks where some games may not work well with it. The button placement doesn't line up at all with the Super Nintendo, so if you ever play an old school game with it, arthritis can be considered a feature. Just one Z button on the top is strange. There's also no select button, just one for start/pause, which is interesting they denote on the controller that this is a pause button. The D-pad and C-stick are a bit too tiny. It is not a perfect controller by a long shot, but it'll forever be one of my all-time favorites. It feels so good in the hands, and when you play a game that works well with it, I mean, why does heroin exist? Just play the damn GameCube. However, while the controller feels great, it did lack innovation. There wasn't much this controller was doing that others didn't. That's where the accessories come into play, as you can get the Wavebird wireless controller separately. Cut the cord. The Wavebird was a revolution for controllers, launching 1 year after the GameCube's initial release. It wasn't the first wireless controller, it was the first good wireless controller. Wireless controllers used to primarily use infrared technology, much like a TV remote, meaning you had to keep them pointed at the transmission signal. The Wavebird used radio waves, which allowed you to point the thing wherever you want. They don't give a shit. Just plug the adapter in, match up the numbers via the dials, which, Nintendo, I was wondering if you could make these smaller. Pop 2 AA's in, and for up to 20 feet away, you're good to go. The battery life is incredible on the Wavebird, though since you have to turn the controller itself off, it can be easy to forget to turn it off. And because of the need for batteries, Nintendo left out the rumble feature of the wired controller, which was built in now. But this wasn't available at launch. So what was available at launch? Just enough. The GameCube launched with 12 games here in the States. Yikes! Definitely wasn't the craziest launch, as a third of the games were sports titles nobody remembers. Oh god, what was the Madden that released that year? Though there were some standouts. Disney's Tarzan Untamed, which, hey, IGN thought it was 0.1 point better than the PS2 version. Star Wars Rogue Squadron 2 Rogue Leader was a big deal. If you wanted a graphical showcase, this was the game to get. It still looks impressively close to the movies and was just a straight up great game to boot. Nintendo had a thing going with LucasArts at the time, really pushing Star Wars titles on their hardware. I mean, a Stormtrooper was one of the Nintendo characters represented on the Nintendo 64 console box. I would say more about this game, but I've never seen a Star Wars movie.
Every day it becomes that much more too late to start.
Sega was notably one of the bigger names on the GameCube at launch, just months after wrapping up things with the Dreamcast. What once was Nintendo's biggest rival became one of their biggest supporters, starting with Super Monkey Ball, the first Sega game on a Nintendo home console. This was a big deal, and for some, it was revolting. Not in my house. But for many Nintendo fans, they finally got to experience Sega games on their turf. And as it turned out, Super Monkey Ball became one of the most beloved GameCube titles. Originally an arcade game titled Monkey Ball released earlier that year, Super Monkey Ball is an enhanced port, i.e. they added Gon. The premise couldn't be simpler. Monkey, ball, you. Just roll the ball to the goal. You control the environment, not the monkey. Don't explain this while sweaty. Seriously, one of the simplest ideas ever for a game. But it doesn't matter because that ended up making it unbelievably accessible and understandable. The game is brutally difficult at times, but never unfair and too daunting for casual players. There's no buttons involved. Just move the stick, and if that's too simple, well, play the party games, you fucking creep. The main game is very grounded in its arcade roots. It's mostly about endurance. How many stages can you beat, and when you lose, it's back to the beginning. And not only does this mode have multiplayer, the rest of the game features all these extra things you can do with others that truly make this an awesome party game. Crazy Taxi also released at launch. Originally an arcade and Dreamcast game by Sega, the GameCube port was oddly published by Acclaim. Sometimes Sega didn't publish their own stuff in some regions back then. Sonic Advance by THQ? Just for good measure. But what about Nintendo? What did they bring to their own party? Well, Wave Race Blue Storm for one.
Not on the list.
Sequel to the beloved Wave Race 64, Blue Storm is primarily here to show just how powerful the GameCube is. Like, dude, I think that's water. It looks so good even today. Blue Storm holds up so well visually. Even the menus look like smeared tears. The water effects were on another level, but while the gameplay was still fundamentally Wave Race at the end of the day, it just didn't leave the same impression as 64. The controls aren't bad, but they're overly sensitive, which makes things more difficult than they need to be in a fast-paced racing game like this, where there's no wiggle room. You have to stay on the course and in between the lines. One micro adjustment of the stick and the game's going through the window. Still a fun game though, with a great presentation, though easily forgotten. And that might be because there was a launch title more people cared about. Reluctantly. Luigi's Mansion, the game you can't help but have this reaction towards.
Oh, how sad.
Regardless of Luigi's Mansion's quality, I'll get to that in due time, let's be honest, this looked lame as hell. You're trusting a console launch with this fucking dork? Nintendo systems were known for launching with revolutionary Mario games. This one felt like they were playing a joke on us. Luigi's Mansion, starring Mario's brother in a haunted mansion, 3 weeks after Halloween. Would it have killed you to retheme it to the next closest holiday? So to be fair, you did get a Mario series game, but Luigi's Mansion is anything but a Mario game. As a launch title, I do kind of think it wasn't the best move. Again, the GameCube launched 3 days after the Xbox. It had Halo, you got Luigi. I think too much pressure was on Luigi's Mansion to be this groundbreaking experience when it was more so just a very charming experience, one that used the GameCube's hardware incredibly well. Feels like a total showcase for the GameCube controller. The analog triggers, dual sticks, it's all used to control Luigi, aiming your flashlight and vacuum around, sucking up ghosts while exploring a haunted mansion, solving puzzles to advance throughout. It's damn short, around 6 hours long, but that kind of adds to the experience. If this was some 20-hour long adventure, I don't know if it would work as well. Luigi's Mansion is a great spooky game to pop in every Halloween, and the fact it doesn't overstay its welcome makes it a fun and easy title to do that with. If only it didn't come out in damn November. I think Luigi's Mansion comes up short when its duty is to sell a console, but as a standalone game, it's a wonderful little experience. It's where Luigi gained a lot of his character. Without this game, he wouldn't be the freak he is today. And the setting is just superb. This mansion feels lived in. It's like a character in of itself. And graphically, it still looks fantastic. The amount of lighting and dust effects is insane. And Nintendo's 2 launch titles, they were pretty much here just to show off the GameCube's technical capabilities. They were good games at the very least, but you could finish them all in a day. After that, all you could do is gawk at the GameCube's boot up sequence. Which that made up for everything. GameCube has one of the simplest menu interfaces out there. Just turn it on without a game in and we can, calendar. This is part of the system I would dick around in as a kid just because I could. It's a strangely ominous menu screen, but I really like seeing the art and taglines used for the games by putting a game in after the menu appears. Anybody do the secret button combos to make funny sounds happen on the startup screen? That's a stupid question. You're alive, aren't you? What about the game boxes? These are cool. Finally, Nintendo had plastic cases for their games. No more cardboard. Of course, in Japan, they got funky as hell with these things. Tiny with cardboard sleeves, just like me. This system is so alright. I've got to see what the rest of the world thinks.
Damn. I could not buy a GameCube all f***ing day.
So that was the GameCube's launch. Nothing amazing, nothing that bad. It was just alright. The launch mainly comprised of sports games, licensed games, and oddball exclusives, most of which you can complete the day you bought the system. However, it wouldn't be much longer until more games came out. Just 2 weeks later, it happened. December 3rd, 2001, Super Smash Bros. Melee released. That's what the police reports say. It may have missed the GameCube's launch, but it didn't matter. You could just replay Luigi's Mansion 60 times. I definitely gave the launch lineup a hard time, but in reality, when you have the next major game come out just 2 weeks later, it kinda doesn't matter. Sexiest voice I've heard all year. Super Smash Bros. Melee was the GameCube game, eventually becoming the best-selling GameCube game. It took Super Smash Bros. For the N64 and turned it into an event. The original Smash felt like a wacky crossover fighter with Nintendo characters, whereas Melee took that concept and made it into something more serious. Like, did you read the news? All of Nintendo's major characters fighting together, but now with faster, smoother gameplay, great visuals, orchestral music, so many more single-player and multiplayer modes, collectibles, secrets to discover. This was the full package. It was a staple of every GameCube owner's collection, except for me. I played it at a friend's house. I remember the main thing that stuck out to me was the fact that the Mario game had a teen rating. Like, come on, this wasn't War of the Whiskers. Melee was the perfect jack of all trades. Obviously, it was a sublime multiplayer experience, but single-player-wise, there was so much to do and unlock. Just getting all the characters and stages took a fortnight, and then all the trophies you could collect in Ogle, the various single-player modes like Classic Mode, Adventure Mode, All-Star Mode, just so many things to do, whether you're playing alone or playing with friends, which undeniably made this one of, if not the best GameCube game. But if Melee wasn't enough 2 weeks after the system's launch, how about another Nintendo-published title the exact same day, or one before? I keep seeing different sources on this. Right alongside Super Smash Bros. Melee, Nintendo released Pikmin for GameCube. Well, I wonder what happened. You know, for a game called this, Pikmin sold fairly well for a new IP on a console with such a low install base, and for good reason. It was Shigeru Miyamoto's baby on the GameCube. I mean, the creator of Mario and Zelda's new game, many expected instant success. You ever tried to explain how to play Pikmin to somebody? You look like an idiot. Pikmin is a game you have to play to get. Every time I tell people, oh, it's quite simple, really. You play as Captain Olimar, crash landing on an alien planet, and you discover Pikmin creatures that grow on the ground, and you pluck them up and throw them at enemies and tell them to build things, and each color has different strengths and weaknesses, and you have to round up all your Pikmin before nighttime. They look at me like I'm deranged, and I'm just saying, ignore the bloodstains, I'm telling the truth. This is one of my favorite games, partially because, well, the concept is hard to explain. Believe me, the game does a great job teaching you everything without feeling overbearing or taking too long to do so. The moment you start playing, it all clicks. Pikmin is a wonderfully fun little game, and coupled with Nintendo's other first-party efforts, it shows that half of their lineup was traditional Nintendo experiences re-energized, and the other half was something completely new, which was kind of my perception of the GameCube's lineup throughout its life. The launch window of GameCube was quite good, all things considered, and the strong initial sales indicated that And that's all she wrote. Nintendo had a really hard time selling the GameCube from 2002 onwards. It felt like the mega fans all bought it at launch. The end. Now, this was the go-to console for kids. I should know. I was once a kid. I'm who everybody goes to for all their kid-related questions. I got my GameCube in 2003, the Platinum Edition, really the only other color introduced here in North America. It always said limited edition on the box, and it's like, really? I saw these everywhere all the time. It was limited to 50 billion units. Limited to! You know, these are probably the least desirable now because this was around the time Nintendo wanted to cut the GameCube's price point. In 2003, Nintendo slashed the price down to $99 and got rid of the digital AV out port on the back, which was used for us Nintendo fans' fancy penis component cables. Only God owns these. They're so expensive and hard to find, and for what? Holy shit, Mario's hat is red! They do look far better than the regular composite cables, but barely anybody used them, and that could be attributed to them being only available to purchase direct from Nintendo. Wow, nobody used the digital AV out. I wonder f***ing why. So they axed the port halfway through the system's life. I mean, it was dumb that they didn't widely offer these, but growing up in the early 2000s, nobody used these. I can't blame them for cutting support. It was all about the yellow, white, and red AV cables because everybody actively hated themselves. However, if you want to use the GameCube now, you definitely want to get an older model with that digital AV port, not for the component cables, but for the modern HDMI adapters. This one's from Eon, and there we go. This looks better than most neighborhoods in my area. The GameCube cleans up obscenely well, much better than the PlayStation 2, so most third-party multi-platform games will look better on here than that console. However, it never really mattered because most of the third-party games people wanted weren't on the GameCube. So that's the deal with owning a game console as a kid. These things never mattered. You don't know what's going on. You just like playing the GameCube. And I looked over at my library and I saw all these third-party games not made by Nintendo. And I thought, what are these people talking about? The GameCube has so much third-party support. And then I realized all of the third-party support was made for Embryo. Third-party games on GameCube. They exist? Most were of the licensed kids game variety. Now, some of these games were pretty great, but most of them were nothing to write home about. As a kid who had a GameCube, this was never an issue. These were the games I would be playing regardless of whatever console I owned that generation. But if you were a badass, you mostly had to look towards a PlayStation 2 or Xbox. The GameCube ran into countless limitations regarding the disc capacity. Many times GameCube versions of games would cut video cutscenes or gameplay content in general to fit on the disc, or they just had to double up on them. And if they actually got some games to fit on the system, they would oftentimes be the worst selling version. Most people who bought the GameCube bought it for the Nintendo first party exclusives, and the rest were parents who bought it for their kids. So oftentimes GameCube got at least an entry or two from a series, but then eventually they would just skip it with the following games. But it just straight up never got Grand Theft Auto 3, Vice City, San Andreas, Metal Gear Solid 2, 3, Devil May Cry 1 through 3, Final Fantasy 10, 11, 12, Silent Hill 2 through 4, Burnout 3, Revenge, basically none of the multi-platform Dance Dance Revolution games, and so many other titles that could have run on it. The GameCube was more than capable, but it just had discs that were too small and an audience that skewed too young and too unique. It definitely helped when third-party games were a bit more Nintendo-esque in design, which is why Sonic had a huge presence here. Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2 were ported over from the Dreamcast, and the GameCube was the only console to get these versions at the time, and that really helped these games out. Most people would agree Sonic Adventure DX isn't as good as the Dreamcast original, but it's still Sonic Adventure and caused many a kid to be diagnosed with becoming a Sonic fan. And yes, it is fatal. Sega made sure Nintendo fans converted, offering both Sonic Mega Collection and Gems Collection, featuring most of the classic Sonic games from the Sega Genesis and other consoles. And if that wasn't enough, the first original from the ground up Sonic title for a non-Sega home console, Sonic Heroes. This one was multi-platform, but the GameCube version is often considered the best, as Sega knew this was where it would do the best. Sonic's fans were mostly on GameCube. Then there was Shadow the Hedgehog. They did Sonic Riders. I still have no goddamn idea how to play this game. There was a lot of, I don't know what it is, but there was a lot of it. I only own Sonic Mega Collection, but I still oddly have a lot of nostalgia for Adventure and Adventure 2 Battle just from seeing clips of them within Mega Collection. There's this whole history of Sonic video, man. I knew there was just so much Sonic on GameCube that I just didn't have access to. All these games have their flaws, but all in all, this was a pretty good generation for Sonic. And hey, the developer Sonic team kept busy with a brand new IP exclusively for the GameCube, Billy Hatcher and the Giant Egg. I wish! Super Monkey Ball got a sequel, Super Monkey Ball 2, 1 year after the original, and even though the first was quite good, this one is undeniably better. It was made specifically for the GameCube, which means we have an actual story mode with typical level progression. It's pretty much more of the same, but better. This is definitely one of the standout series on the system. Everybody remembers Super Monkey Ball. Nobody remembers Super Monkey Ball Adventure. This was a weird one, not developed by Sega. Instead, Traveler's Tales, a spin-off, released within a 1 year span of Sega releasing 3 Super Monkey Ball games. Billy Hatcher died for this? Sega also ported some of their other non-Sonic Dreamcast games, like Skies of Arcadia and Phantasy Star Online, fundamentally the online GameCube game with online multiplayer. You can buy this broadband adapter, which, according to the box, extends possibilities. Might want to remove the plural from that. While only 2 Japan-only games and Phantasy Star used it for online multiplayer, this adapter was mainly used for LAN play, connecting multiple GameCubes for multiplayer without split screen. Only 4 games used it. But Nintendo obviously wasn't interested in online multiplayer with GameCube, which makes it that much more bizarre Sega put Phantasy Star Online on there, and pretty much only on there, at least for a little bit. It eventually hit Xbox, but never the PS2. Well, they thought the GameCube and Dreamcast were the most structurally similar, and it would be easy, which made porting games from the Dreamcast to be fairly effective. Ikaruga came over from there, and that was a big deal. IGN's frothing demand for the game increased. Well, Nintendo played nice with a former enemy, but what about a former ally? Square was the RPG powerhouse, and when they jumped from Nintendo to Sony with the PlayStation, it hurt the Nintendo 64 big time. And while Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest remained at home on the PlayStation 2, they supported the Game Boy Advance quite heavily and actually collaborated with Nintendo for a GameCube exclusive Final Fantasy. Square on Nintendo was back! And it was the only Square Enix game on GameCube, and Nintendo still published it, and Square had to create a new company name to develop the game because they didn't want to piss off Sony due to their exclusivity deal with mainline Final Fantasies. Was it worth it? Well, it was a fairly decent success. It was just a spin-off of Final Fantasy, but a multiplayer one. Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, using the Game Boy Advance as multiplayer controllers. This was a random initiative Nintendo had in the GameCube's life to push games using the Game Boy Advance. I guess because that system was doing so well, Nintendo thought maybe pushing it alongside the GameCube would help things. The olives aren't selling well, push it with milk. I mean, it does offer unique gameplay opportunities, like with Pac-Man Versus. While Crystal Chronicles was developed by Square and published by Nintendo, this one was developed by Nintendo and published by Namco. Hell, Miyamoto even designed the game. It's multiplayer Pac-Man, with players on the TV as the ghosts and the player with the Game Boy Advance as Pac-Man, and it's so damn good! It's a small game, though. It was never meant to be available by itself. They gave it away with certain games as pre-order bonuses, and it eventually came with this Pac-Man World 2 bundle. Talk about bang for your buck. I'm gonna talk about this now because the lady at Great Clips wasn't listening. Pac-Man World 2 is great. It's critically nothing special, but I think it did a bang-up job evolving Pac-Man into a 3D platformer. The music and visuals just make me so damn happy. Pac-Man World 3 creeps me the hell out, okay? Pac-Man talks, which implies he has organs, which implies he can bleed. 2 is a good time, nothing special, but I think it's very entertaining. Obviously, these games are more so specialty if you grew up playing with them, but I still feel that with World 2 specifically, you can definitely have some good simple fun playing it today. But anyways, Pac-Man Versus and Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles showed Nintendo was legitimately trying to collaborate with third parties, more so than ever before, with Capcom being one of their biggest partners. Nintendo struck a deal to make the Resident Evil series exclusive on the GameCube for that generation, which was nuts. I mean, this was an M-rated survival horror franchise born and raised on PlayStation. This was one hell of a foster home. But Capcom found Nintendo to be incredibly supportive. They were able to remake the original Resident Evil from the ground up in what's considered by many to be one of the greatest remakes of all time, to which they then put out an original Resident Evil a few months later based on the remake's graphics and engine, Resident Evil 0. This game was actually originally being developed for the Nintendo 64, and while its reception wasn't nearly as great as the remake, we'll take what we can get. Shortly after, Resident Evil 2, 3, and Code Veronica reported over. These weren't at all remakes. 2 and 3 were literally just the original PlayStation games running on GameCube. This is a common practice today, seeing old games released on new consoles with little to no graphical improvements, but it's so weird on GameCube, like this isn't right. Some Resident Evil games still appeared on PS2, but the series was pretty loyal to Nintendo in this era, evident by Capcom's initiative, the Capcom 5. 5 brand new AAA exclusive games from Capcom for the GameCube. These included Piano 3, Beautiful Joe, Dead Phoenix, Killer 7, and the big one, Resident Evil 4. Capcom meant business with the GameCube. Dead Phoenix was canceled, Beautiful Joe was ported to PlayStation 2, Killer 7 released for PS2 day and date with the GameCube version, Resident Evil 4 was announced for PS2 before the GameCube version even released after the director promised to cut his head off if such a thing ever happened, but thank God P&O 3 stayed exclusive. Credit where credit's due, Beautiful Joe was amazing and was exclusive for roughly a year. Hell, it got a sequel and now is exclusive to GameCube. For a month, and Resident Evil 4 on GameCube was exclusive for almost a year as well and is superior visually. The PS2 version adds some content, but still, RE4 was one of the greatest games of all time. It may be available on countless platforms now, however, I still will always see it as a GameCube game, even though that's so far in the past at this point. It's easy to forget sometimes. Well, Nintendo brought over one PlayStation franchise, how could one more hurt? Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes, a remake of the original Metal Gear Solid by Silicon Knights. This is a weird one. It takes the original game and mixes it with the gameplay of the sequel and cranks everything up to be as over the top as possible. It's still a totally valid way to experience Metal Gear Solid and gave the GameCube something the other consoles just didn't have. But that's not always a great thing. Swinging back to Capcom, Mega Man Network Transmission. Who gives a shit? Capcom only released 2 original Mega Man games, Network Transmission and Mega Man X Command Mission, both far cries from what you'd expect from a Mega Man game on a Nintendo console. They were just okay. If you wanted the actual games, there were 2 collections which did the trick, though the new Mega Man X platformers were still exclusive to PlayStation 2, which is just weird. But for multiplats, Ubisoft supported the GameCube quite a bit. The Prince of Persia series, Beyond Good and Evil, Tom Clancy, they were pretty much all on the GameCube, and Namco gave it Tales of Symphonia, which is still definitely the most beloved Tales game out there. GameCube did much better with RPGs than the Nintendo 64 did. The PlayStation 2 still had it beat, but it was obvious there was a little something for everybody on this console, which was something Nintendo really strived for. Not only did they try to make as many exclusivity deals as possible, they lent their characters out to other companies. Soul Calibur 2 launched across all 3 systems, with each one having a unique character. PlayStation 2 had Heihachi from Tekken, Xbox had Spawn, but GameCube had Link from The Legend of Zelda. This is something Nintendo is far more willing to do nowadays, but this is still pretty wild to see and made the GameCube version a success. Not enough for Soul Calibur 3, but out of all the companies, I think EA may have given the GameCube the most consistent support. Madden, FIFA, NHL, NASCAR, Tiger Woods, SSX, 007, The Sims, Harry Potter, Medal of Honor, Need for Speed, Time Splitters. Nearly all of EA's software releases at the time released on GameCube in addition to the others. Now, because of the lacking online support and smaller discs, they may not have been the definitive versions, and in most cases the GameCube version sold much less, but EA was rewarded for their loyalty. In NBA Street V3 and SSX On Tour, you can play as Mario, because Nintendo wouldn't budge on Doshin the Giant. Little Mac from Super Punch-Out was playable in Fight Night Round 2, alongside Super Punch-Out straight up being playable within Fight Night. You can't say Nintendo didn't try with third-party relations. It was really cute to see. But the PS2 had Grand Theft Auto. I don't really think Luigi and NBA was going to do much at that point. Third-party support wasn't nearly on the same level as the PS2 or the Xbox, but there was always more than enough to play if you only had a GameCube. And I think that was important. The problem wasn't necessarily that there wasn't anything to do with the GameCube, it was what you couldn't do with the GameCube. You couldn't play DVDs or CDs or not Nickelodeon Party Blast. However, there were so many unique things you could do with a GameCube. You could get a hernia. Nintendo's first-party output on this thing was unprecedented. One of, if not the best lineups they've ever had. Pretty much every single one of their core franchises got an entry on GameCube, and they introduced loads of new ones as well. But every Nintendo console is defined by the mainline Mario title that releases on it. And nearly a year after launch, the GameCube got Super Mario Sunshine. Well, move that down a peg. After what many critics referred to as Luigi's barn at launch, we finally got a traditional Mario game that next year. De-emphasized traditional. Sunshine followed a lot of Super Mario 64's framework, but changed a ton, truly making this feel like one of the most different Mario games out there. You have a water pack, Flood. You can spray water, hover with it. It's a fun and helpful addition, though Mario's raw controls barely need the help, as this is one of the tightest controlling Mario games. Mario 64 feels sluggish in comparison to how quick and nimble Mario is in Sunshine, and the stages are wonderfully designed, and it's an immensely memorable game. People fucking hate it. This is one of the most polarizing Mario titles. The difficulty can be pretty harsh sometimes, and going for 100% completion is grueling. It's not required, you don't get anything special for it, but elements of Sunshine definitely feel quite rushed. Lots of content was cut prior to release to get the game out in time, and while the title doesn't feel incomplete, it obviously is very conservative with the content that's there. They'll squeeze everything they can out of a level to make sure you play through it again and again, and coupled with the unbalanced difficulty at times, and Sunshine can be quite frustrating. But I still love it. While Mario Sunshine is a very peculiar Mario game, it's still a Mario game. The only Mario on the GameCube. Take it. And weirdly enough, out of all franchises to get multiple entries on the platform, it wasn't Mario. It was Metroid. Holiday 2002, Metroid Prime hit store shelves. One day before Metroid Fusion released on the Game Boy Advance, after 8 years of no Metroid game, finally in 2002, fans could say,
God, stop with the Metroid games.
Prime was not only the first 3D entry in the series, but it was first person as well, a move that confused and worried many, but ended up making for one of the greatest games of all time. Metroid Prime was developed by newcomer Retro Studios and came out brilliantly. At the time, Metroid was at its height. So, a few years later, Metroid Prime 2 Echoes followed. Wait, it did? Echoes is barely talked about in comparison to the original and sold about half as much, so it still got rave reviews. I think Prime did so well because it was an entirely new thing. Everybody had to check it out. But then by the time Prime 2 released, I think that excitement wore down a bit. I don't know. Nintendo pretty much positioned Metroid as a competitor towards Halo. Prime 2 featured a multiplayer mode, but Halo 2 featured online and launched the same week. Oh, these numbers make a lot more sense. Oh. Still great games, more Metroid than I think anybody ever expected on this console, which I can say the same about Zelda. My there was so much Zelda content here, and it all started in 2003 with The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. Okay, people weren't too thrilled with this art direction. When the GameCube tech demo looked like this, and soon after this was the Zelda game Nintendo showed, people weren't happy. They wanted Ocarina of Time with better graphics, and what Nintendo gave us was better than that. Everybody was pissed. Let's be honest, Wind Waker looks a million times better than that tech demo anyways, but people wanted a gritty, realistic Zelda. This was when Lord of the Rings was huge, so I think people really wanted a Zelda game that gave off the vibes of those flicks, and instead we got a pain chart. I mean, disregarding the graphics, Wind Waker is a great Zelda game. It's one of the most gripping titles in the whole series due to how lively and fun everything feels, but it's never afraid to be a downer or more serious at times. And while the cartoony visuals were lamented at the time, have you seen this game recently? Like, this looks better than some games look right now. If the game came out today, nobody would think twice about it. The toon style helped to make this game so damn everlasting. It will never look bad or outdated. And while many detested the style back in the day, it's the most frequently used Zelda art style. Numerous games use Toon Link, and I do feel like it's one of the most true to Zelda art styles out there. I've always felt Zelda's supposed to be colorful and lively, but the beautiful thing about it is, it's a legend. Each game is supposed to be a different story passed down generation to generation, and the differing art styles represent that. How each storyteller puts their own unique spin on things. So who the hell told this story? Just 1 year later, in 2004, The Legend of Zelda 4 Swords Adventures released, still using the Toon Link character design.
Oh great, now there's 4 of them?
4 Swords Adventures was the sequel to the bonus sub-game included in the Game Boy Advance port of A Link to the Past.
Why did nobody care?
Multiplayer top-down Zelda, and the only way to do it is to plug in one of these.
Why did nobody care?
This was the biggest push by Nintendo for the Game Boy Advance to GameCube road trip yet. You can play 4 Swords Adventure single player, but that's sad. To play multiplayer, everybody needs a Game Boy Advance with a GBA to GameCube link cable to play, because certain things appear on the TV, certain things appear on the GBA. Now, is this really necessary? No. They could have easily designed this game to work just fine on one screen, but the GBA does allow for each player to go off and do their own thing. It's a fun multiplayer romp, but obviously one of the weakest Zeldas single player wise. I'll give Nintendo this, it takes a lot of guts to make a Zelda game based around owning 4 Game Boy Advances, 4 link cables, and 1 GameCube. Stupid, it's also stupid. Most of the time, linking your Game Boy Advance to the GameCube and specific titles unlocked extra goodies if you had the right game. Linking Metroid Fusion to Prime unlocked a special suit in the original Metroid for NES. Wind Waker, you could use the Tingle Tuner with the GBA link cable. Mom, the Tingle Tuner! Regardless of 4 Swords Adventures being good, it still wasn't the Zelda fans wanted. That came at the very end of the GameCube's life. Announced in 2004 and finally releasing in holiday 2006, The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess. Nintendo listened. This was the Zelda people wanted. Something darker, more epic, and it was, again, a phenomenal game, though it doesn't hold up as well as Wind Waker does graphically. I mean, it all comes down to art style. Twilight Princess on GameCube still looks good. I mean, it honestly looks like an early Xbox 360 game, and the low resolution masks a lot of flaws. But come on, this just looks better. Gameplay-wise, comparing Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, I really think it completely comes down to preference. I don't think one is obviously better than the other. I'd say Twilight Princess is a more consistently good game with more to it. The original version of Wind Waker does have some glaring issues in the back end of the game. The infamous Triforce quest goes on for far too long, but Wind Waker is inherently more charming and memorable in my opinion. If anything, I think it's incredible we got these two games on the GameCube at all, and they were as good as they were. Twilight Princess was the last game Nintendo released on the GameCube, and they basically did it out of obligation because by the time it released, their next console had already launched, with Twilight Princess on it. The game got delayed so many times, Nintendo decided to release it on Wii first and then follow it up with a version on GameCube. But since this is the original version, the original vision of the game, I think this still feels the best. Twilight Princess on Wii forces motion controls onto the player, which aren't horrible, but the game wasn't designed around them. Aiming your bow or slingshot is perfection with the pointer, but everything else is a bit more tacked on. It definitely feels most at home on GameCube, which ironically is where the least people played it. But its release cemented the GameCube as the ultimate Zelda machine at the time, especially taking the bonus discs into consideration. For pre-ordering Wind Waker, you'd get this special version of Ocarina of Time from Nintendo 64 on a GameCube disc, including a few demos and the never-before-released Master Quest edition of Ocarina of Time. And then just because they could, they released Ocarina of Time on GameCube again!
Just in case you blinked the first time.
The Legend of Zelda Collector's Edition. This came bundled with GameCube consoles for a period of time, mainly because they wouldn't sell. So Nintendo farted some Zelda games on a disc and called it a day. This disc includes Zelda 1 and 2 for NES and Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask for N64, plus some little bonuses like a Wind Waker demo and a short video retrospective of the Zelda series, sort of pointing out how you can play every Zelda game released up to that point on GameCube. All the games playable on that disc, the Game Boy games, plus a Link to the Past on Game Boy Advance, you can play them all via the Game Boy Player. Oh, this is it! The greatest thing ever invented. It's in my will. The Game Boy Player made virtually all Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games playable on GameCube. Just insert this on the bottom, pop this on the top, bam! You're using the Game Boy camera. It fundamentally adds roughly 10,000 games to the GameCube's library. This was actually the only thing I got with my GameCube when I was younger. On my birthday, I got this right alongside my Platinum GameCube. It was the only thing I could do with it for a while there, just play my Game Boy Advance games on the TV. Hey, I wasn't complaining. To have these games you could only ever play on a non-lit screen in the car on the same screen you watch Wings on, I learned to love that day. But this wasn't even something the GameCube needed to prove its worth. It was the cherry on top. Mario Sunshine may have been the only mainline Mario, but we got literally every type of spin-off imaginable. First up, Mario Kart Double Dash.
Why, yes, I'm turned on.
Such a damn good Mario Kart. The gimmick of 2 characters per kart is so fun and adds way more strategy to which character to pick. It used to be, I like Yoshi because damn! Now each character has their own special item and you can mix that with other characters' special item by pairing them together. Each character is their own way but mix that with another's, and there's so much more to consider now. Like, what will my mother think? God, I used to play battle mode so much with friends. It was my favorite part of the game. I tried to buy the game off of the friend who had it and they would never budge. Sold me Mario Sunshine though. The Mario sports titles were so plentiful. We got awesome renditions of Mario Golf and Mario Tennis, better than ever, just good solid arcadey multiplayer sports games. But we got 2 new series on the system, Mario Baseball and Mario Strikers. Mario Superstar Baseball was developed by Namco of all people and followed the footsteps of Mario Golf and Tennis. It was baseball with a Mario spin. It's a good solid time, but Super Mario Strikers is just a bit more interesting. It's the only other Mario sports game that actively asks me to suck it off. I have no idea how this got approved, but it was during a time in which you could tell Nintendo was squirming in their seats saying,
We have to start publishing M-rated games!
I know it's sacrilegious to say, but while I appreciate Mario Strikers, I vastly prefer Mario Golf. Come on, that just looks funny. The sports titles weren't the only pieces of Mario multiplayer mayhem on the block. We got Mario Party 4, Mario Party 5, Mario Party 6, Mario Party 7. 2006 was known as the year without Mario Party. Mario Party became Nintendo's annual franchise for the GameCube, and you know what? I don't hear people complaining, because that was 15 years ago. So many reviewers hated these releases, saying how they were so lazy, the same thing over and over again. It's like, you guys gave Madden a 9.5. It's like, oh, the Nintendo 64 games were better. Like, have you played the GameCube ones? They're so good, and each of them are way more distinct than you may remember. For a yearly series, I think the differences between each Mario Party on GameCube is damn impressive. Hell, they introduced the GameCube microphone for 6 and 7, 6 being the best one. There's a whole day and night mechanic, but each of them is good in its own right. I don't think they had to really do a new one every single year, but hey, it made it so then no matter what was releasing on GameCube that holiday season, you could rest easy knowing if all else fails, you could always succumb to buying the Mario Party for that year. They legitimately did a lot more with each release than people give them credit for. I think the GameCube era is the best Mario Party's ever been. Okay, Dance Dance Revolution Mario Mix, the absolute worst Mario Party's ever been. Another one of Nintendo's collaborations, this time with Konami. You know, it's pretty strange to me that out of all franchises Konami had, Dance Dance Revolution never really hit the Nintendo consoles all too much. Like, come on, this is Nintendo fans' bread and butter. They like arrows and dumb shit. It's even stranger, Nintendo basically had to give them Mario to make a DDR game happen on the console. This was the only DDR on GameCube, which is like accessories. That's a Nintendo fan's wet dream. Well, at least this one came over, and it's Dance Dance Revolution with a Mario skin. Yeah, I think this might show how dire third-party support was at the time. Nintendo couldn't even get a Dance Dance Revolution game, a series that was pumping out like a dozen entries a year in arcades and on consoles without lending their characters. Maybe it was because the GameCube's disc size being not optimal for all those songs, but for fuck's sake, the Game Boy Color got DDR. You know, this was a harder game to nab for a while there. It got discontinued fairly quickly, so yeah, DDR version 46 on the PlayStation 2 is fine. The one GameCube version that was exclusive, get rid of it. Most of the Mario spin-offs are pretty frantic like this, but for the mellow players out there, you had Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door. A follow-up to the N64 game, Thousand Year Door just expanded upon everything, a bigger, more epic and grossing RPG adventure. They didn't need any gimmicks or massive alterations to the gameplay. They took the original game and just made it better. Just a really solid, easy RPG for people who don't like RPGs. And I'm done talking about that. What do you know about Wario World? Wario's first home console platformer. He had Wario Land on the handhelds, but this was Wario World, bitch. It was developed by Treasure, one of those developer choices you think was just made because of their name. Like, I love Treasure. They've done Gunstar Heroes, Ikaruga, Sin and Punishment. Why give them Mario? Oh, because he likes gold. It's a pretty standard platformer, nothing all too special, but I appreciate the fact that they tried to do a 3D Wario game. I feel something like this just wouldn't have been made today. They were trying all kinds of new things. It was an exciting time for every series. Except for WarioWare. WarioWare Mega Party Games. I love the WarioWare series, but this game is just unimpressive. It takes the micro games from the original WarioWare on Game Boy Advance and just puts them on a GameCube. They don't look any different. In fact, they just straight up don't look good. They do not hide the fact this is just a Game Boy Advance game at its core. You don't get the single player story mode or the extra side games from that one. Instead, they focus on multiplayer here. There are a ton of really fun multiplayer modes focused on playing the micro games. It can be an absolute blast. Though I do wish there was a bit more to this one. That's something I find myself saying about every WarioWare game. I love them, but they always feel like there should be more content, especially with this one. I mean, great multiplayer modes, but I want more, especially considering all the microgames are recycled from the GBA. It surprises me how well this game reviewed at the time, while Mario Party always got crucified for using the same dice in every game. Well, if Wario got 2 games, Donkey Kong better get like 3 bongo rhythm games. Oh, thank Christ. So Donkey Kong was in a weird place this generation. Basically, it was just a bunch of weird spin-offs for a while. And add Donkey Konga to the list. Donkey Konga used the DK Bongos, an accessory for the GameCube based on just Donkey Kong that works with 4 games. One less than the GameCube microphone. Accessories that were so much less specific got so much less support. Donkey Konga was a rhythm game. Pretty simple, clap and beat the bongos. They're all fun enough. 1 and 2 came out here, while 3 was exclusive to Japan for whatever reason. Were they scared? Konga was a fun little spin-off series, but Donkey Kong Jungle Beat is a bit more interesting, being a platformer that uses the bongos. I don't think anybody at Nintendo actively thought it was a good idea to use the bongos for a platformer. I think they just wanted to see if they could do it. They did. Jungle Beat is an insanely polished DK game. The first Nintendo made themselves in-house in over a decade. It was made by the team that would go on to make Super Mario Galaxy, and you can tell so hard. So many little elements that would go on to appear in that game got their start here. It's so cool. It's not a practical game, but a really cool one, though that does make me yearn for something simpler. How about Pokemon Channel?
This is it.
Pokemon Channel is a simulation game, pretty much a successor to Hey You Pikachu, but with even less content. You can watch Pokemon TV shows with Pikachu, play little mini games here and there. I am so glad I went with this and not the transfusion. There's also Pokemon Box, only available online and through the Pokemon Center store. It was just a game that would let you connect your Pokemon GBA games and organize your Pokemon. Again, glad I went with this instead. But there were legitimate Pokemon games released. Weirdly enough, full-blown RPGs. People clamored for a traditional Pokemon game on home consoles for decades. And the GameCube kind of gave us that to some extent. Pokemon Coliseum was basically a successor to the Pokemon Stadium games on Nintendo 64, but this one included a story mode. It's an actual Pokemon game on a home console, kinda sorta. Having somebody who couldn't give two left pisses about Pokemon try to explain how Pokemon Coliseum is an RPG but not like the main Pokemon games is like trying to watch him explain why you shouldn't be executed. So, while the mainline Pokemon games are about collecting all the Pokemon you can to help you battle your way to being the best Pokemon trainer out there through RPG mechanics, a game like Pokemon Coliseum is more so just an RPG adventure in the Pokemon universe. There's only like 50 Pokemon in the whole story and no Pokedex, so it's obvious the collecting aspect is de-emphasized in favor of just being a single-player RPG story mode in addition to the battling portion from the Stadium series. How'd I do? However, it's still an RPG Pokemon adventure on consoles. It may be a spin-off, but it's closer to a mainline game than it's not. I think it did a decent job giving a 3D Pokemon adventure on a home console. They even followed it up with Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness. I think they were definitely trying to make this look more like the Game Boy Advance games rather than a Pokemon Stadium type game. The title and especially the box art really feel more so like the mainline games. For most of Nintendo's home consoles, Pokemon releases were always just spin-offs. Prime example, the Pokemon Company always considered the franchise to work best in handheld form, while home consoles being more fit for other experiences. But Pokemon Coliseum and XD Gale of Darkness showed they were definitely being pushed as much as they could have to give the GameCube a more traditional Pokemon experience, even if they didn't completely meet all the requirements. And if Pokemon games couldn't save the GameCube, I'm sure they said, fine, we have nothing to lose. Battalion Wars. This was a different take on the Advance Wars series, more action-oriented compared to turn-based strategy. I've always found Battalion Wars to be a weird series of Nintendo, so it's a home console version of Advance Wars that really has practically nothing to do with Advance Wars. It's odd they did this because Fire Emblem, the series by the same developer as Advance Wars, Intelligent Systems, had a very traditional entry on the GameCube. Path of Radiance. The first Fire Emblem on a home console to release outside of Japan, that was a big deal. I think. I mean, what? Did you expect me to have anything to say about Fire Emblem Path of Radiance? It's Fire Emblem. I'm a fucking idiot. Do the math. I think it's great that they were consistently bringing out the Fire Emblem titles to the West, though. The Path of Radiance feels so epic and looks great even today. Now, it's wild to see the CGI cutscenes look so on par without cutscenes looking more modern Fire Emblem games. Path of Radiance was definitely a darker game compared to Nintendo's other outings, but it was still a Nintendo game at the end of the day. The one game took what it meant to be a Nintendo game somewhere it's never been. Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem, the first M-rated Nintendo published title. A survival horror game unlike any other. Even to this day, just walking around the opening where nothing of note happens is creepy as all hell. Just that ominous sound in the background. The game actively fucks with you at every turn, playing tricks on the player themselves to scare them, not the characters in the game. That's what's brilliant about this title and what makes it so special. It's one of the most truly scary survival horror games ever made. I personally think this holds up better than the first few Resident Evils. It's easy to understand why it didn't do the greatest sales-wise. I mean, why would you want a game that lies and tells you your save data has been corrupted? You're going out of your way to create problems for yourself. And then we have Geist, Nintendo's other M-rated game on the GameCube. And that's all it'll ever be. Yeah, this one didn't leave the same impact that Eternal Darkness did. It's okay, the concept behind Geist is wicked cool. It's about ghosts! Both of these games didn't light sales charts on fire, but at least Pikmin did well enough to net a sequel, Pikmin 2! Pikmin 2 is such a cool mess. It's quite a bit different structurally from the first, but that makes it more interesting. I like that they went in a new direction. They could have easily made Pikmin 2 more of the same, but there's legitimate reasons to play both titles. They took more risks on this console. For example, they brought over loads of games from series that were originally never localized. Animal Crossing launched on the Nintendo 64 in Japan only, but that exact version with some updates came on over to the GameCube worldwide. It was all about just being alive.
Not interested.
Collect items, upgrade your house. It took the small elements of life normally seen as mundane yet are satisfying at their core and made a gaming experience about them. I don't think anybody would have expected this game to become one of Nintendo's largest franchises, especially considering the limitations of the consoles that originally released on. It's hard to imagine Animal Crossing without online support in some way. To visit your friend's town in this entry, you basically had to plug in their memory card. And of all games to not use this damn accessory. However, Animal Crossing did support the e-reader, an accessory for the Game Boy Advance that Nintendo somehow thought would work well as a GameCube accessory. So you have to plug the e-reader into the Game Boy Advance, plug that into the GameCube, and scan a card for said GameCube game to unlock certain content. At one point or another, isn't plugging the Game Boy Advance in enough? More GameCube games than you think supported the peripheral. Pikmin 2 in Japan, Pokemon Coliseum in Japan, Pokemon Channel. Hey, 4 is more than I'd think. Which, this just makes me wonder why they didn't just have the e-reader as a standalone unit you could plug into the Game Boy Advance or the GameCube. Instead, you always had to plug it into a Game Boy Advance. And for GBA games that supported it, you had to plug the e-reader into a separate Game Boy Advance, then connect that Game Boy Advance to your Game Boy Advance. Nintendo in 2005.
Nobody gets me!
If you want to talk about strange GameCube moments, how about this? The Japanese exclusive GameCube model made by Panasonic, the Panasonic Q. This is a GameCube with a DVD player built in, but it's not like DVD functionality was programmed into the GameCube. You swap between DVD player mode and GameCube mode. By all extents and purposes, it's a DVD player and GameCube duct taped together. It's a gorgeous device, and even though it was obscenely expensive in Japan, I think for the right price, it could have significantly helped GameCube sales over here. The PS2 and Xbox truly had the advantage with DVD playback, especially the PS2. So while this wouldn't have made Sony piss their pants, I think they would have head to the bathroom just in case. Well, it works better as closet fodder for me. But then we have Chibi Robo, my darling, my checklist of sins. This is a game I think of when GameCube is brought up. Something different and weird, but good in its own right. It's so charming and bizarre, controlling a little robot in a big house aiming to make the residents happier. This was the generation where they were willing to do weird shit. Exactly! Use the microphone from Mario Party 6 to control pinball in this feudal Japan wartime pinball game, made by the creators of Seaman and Ute Tower. Custom Robo! Only Nintendo would have 2 games released for the same console released within 2 years of each other about robots, both with the name C-Robo. Much like Animal Crossing, this series originally released on Nintendo 64 and finally made its way over here on the GameCube. I kinda wish the game was dumber, and I'm not trying to be weird about this, just the game's about customizing your robot and then battling with it, and I just feel like both customizing and battling aren't as fun as they could be to me. I wish it was a bit more of a party fighting game than the action RPG that it is, but hey, still a solid game, just not really my thing. Bianco and Bianco Origins by Monolith Soft, who went on to develop the Xenoblade series. Card battling RPGs, first one published by Namco, second by Nintendo. Cubivore, Gotcha Force, there's so many forgotten games on the GameCube, and we're still not done with the major releases. Kirby Air Ride, the only Kirby game on the platform. There was a platform in development that eventually became Return to Dreamland on Wii years later, but Air Ride was a different take on racing. Let's make a racing game where you only use one button. Yeah, let's also make a Donkey Kong where you look like a 1080 Avalanche, sequel to 1080 Snowboarding on the 64. Pretty much the Wave Race Blue Storm of that series. God, Nintendo put a ton of effort into their non-Mario Kart racers, especially F-Zero GX. Have you met Gadd? No, but you got damn close. You thought Sega making GameCube games was weird? How about booting up F-Zero GX and seeing that Sega logo right at the start, next to the Nintendo one no less? Yeah, this was a collaborative effort. Amusement Vision, the Sega studio responsible for Monkey Ball, developed this, and it's easy to see why there wasn't a home console F-Zero after this for decades, because how the hell do you top this? Never before have I played a racing game that puts you in a trance like GX does. The visuals and smoothness are unmatched with all the colors and especially the track design. I just get sucked in while playing. Sometimes when I see a road above me, I flinch, like it almost feels like you're really there playing the game. It's amazing. It's brutally difficult, but GX is an amazing racer and the peak of the F-Zero franchise. This is about as good as it gets. I am sorry, Star Fox fans. Star Fox Adventures was the first Star Fox released on the GameCube. Who were they fooling here? It's not Star Fox. It used to be a game called Dinosaur Planet, but was changed later on to include the Star Fox crew. It's not a bad game, not by a long shot. It takes the universe of Star Fox and turns it into more of a Zelda game, an on-foot adventure with puzzles and combat. This was developed by Rare, who supplied the Nintendo 64 with half its library, and they were positioned to be an excellent ally to have throughout the GameCube generation. And a day after Adventures released, they were bought by Microsoft. You know, Adventures got a ton of slack back in the day, but the thing is, it's quite good. It's just not Star Fox. I'd say give this game a chance if you can today, and if you're in the mood for a real man Star Fox, a few years later, Nintendo supplied you with exactly that. Not Nintendo specifically. Star Fox started to truly struggle this generation. Nintendo gave up on making the games themselves and started to outsource them. Rare developed Adventures and Namco developed Star Fox Assault. Another fine game, much more in line with what you'd expect out of the franchise, though expanding to on-foot missions in addition to the on-rail space shooting definitely shows how they felt the need to radically expand the gameplay of Star Fox. The original on SNES and Star Fox 64 were short games. You just keep replaying them to find new paths and nab a high score, and that type of game was starting to become less and less in demand. And that's kind of the story of Nintendo this generation. They struggled regardless of how amazing the GameCube's lineup was. And while this was a hard pill for me to swallow as a kid, and even now I see all these amazing games, and Nintendo gave us pretty much every franchise we wanted. And it's hard to comprehend how this was one of Nintendo's lowest selling systems. It becomes easier and easier to see why as time progresses.
I love this system. It will always be my favorite of all time. But if somebody told me they weren't huge into it, I'd understand. Much like any other stupid fucking opinion they'd have, but still, I get it. I think the GameCube had some of the most consistent yet creative output from Nintendo, while others may see it as too experimental or, oddly enough, too safe. Games were either just more of the same from the Nintendo 64, or some games strayed too far, not being what fans wanted from that franchise. I mean, Star Fox got both of that here. Looking back at this whole generation, I think it's clear as day. GameCube owners were very satisfied with their console. But for those who didn't own one, there just wasn't that major hook. There were tons of games to play and enjoy here, but you could say that about every console out at the time. That wasn't special. So it makes sense why the PlayStation 2 dominated and the GameCube sold as little as it did. But I feel that the more limited library and lacking the ability to do anything but play games creates a more passionate connection to the console. You didn't buy this because it made the most practical sense. You bought this to play Mario Party 5, damn it. I feel that everybody who owned a GameCube can agree on and bond over how cool and fun the games were and still are. How much it stood apart from the competition in terms of its library and design. It was pretty much a standard game console but with a Nintendo twist, which is what a lot of people wanted from the Wii generation when the company leaned too heavily into the casual market. Why can't Nintendo just make a standard game console to compete with the Xbox and PlayStation? Well, they did, and you didn't buy it, but I did, and I'd do it again. 4 more times, and when it comes to choosing between DVD playback and it had to be done.